Greetings to everyone. This is the third in our professional development series here at Cielo Azul Elementary. Today, we're going to move away from phonemic awareness. Last time our presentation was about how phonemic awareness relates to sight word development. Today I want to talk more about phonics and spelling and word study and syllable types. Okay, so to start, I want to share some important resources. This book, I emphasized last time, several members of the staff I know have copies of this book, and it's really very helpful. And so I want to encourage everyone to seek out this book. It only came out in 2015, so this is recent information. Okay. The whole book is great. Chapters 1 through 4 are the really critical ones, though, that would be really helpful. We talked on our first professional development about how there's been a lot of studies now about how almost every teacher training program in America really didn't properly prepare teachers for their reading, to be a reading instructor. This chapters 1 through 4 really goes a long way in filling in that gap. Okay, this next book, Louisa Moat's book, Speech to Print, came out in the first edition. I have a copy of this book that I got about 10 years ago. And when I got it, it was the first edition. And at Dr. Fierro's last training, he pointed out something that I was unaware of, that there's a second edition to this book. And what he encouraged everyone, don't get the first edition. It's more, it's a little more dense. Okay, and boy, when I read that book, it was extremely challenging. And so, but it's filled with really helpful information. Get Speech to Print. Boy, it's really a great book. And get the second edition because it's written in a much more accessible manner. Okay, this book, again, the whole book is great. Chapters 1 through 6 are the really helpful ones. Okay, this one. Okay. Beginning to Read by Marilyn Adams. This book came out 27 years ago. Okay, this information has been around for a long time. This is really very helpful, especially around sort of this orthographic processing that we're going to talk about today. Chapter 6 is the orthographic processing chapter, and I have a scan of that chapter, and I'll share that with you guys. The chapter 6 from Marilyn Adams. Okay, I want to just talk briefly again about this slide from Hollis Scarborough. And this, you can see this is this model, what they call it the rope model for skilled reading. And on this slide, you can see the top half is the language comprehension part. This uses the simple view of reading, which is that word recognition times your language comprehension equals your reading comprehension. So the top part, the language comprehension, that's where our curriculum, the ReadyGen, is really strong. It's really good for that. The bottom part, though, down in the word recognition, it's pretty widely acknowledged that the ReadyGen didn't go all the way on that. Okay, it's not as strong on word recognition. That's where you could turn to the ReadyUp, the supplemental curriculum that accompanies the ReadyGen. So we're going to continue to focus on the bottom half, on the word recognition part. The majority of kids in an elementary school, their reading comprehension problems are due to word recognition problems. Okay, at the lower grades, first grade, 80% of reading comprehension is accounted for by word recognition. Okay, even up in fifth grade, it's about 50% of their reading comprehension is accounted for by word recognition. So it's a really important thing. Okay, so today we're going to focus only a little bit on phonological awareness, but what we're going to talk about is decoding and how that relates to sight word development, whereas last time it was phonological awareness and how it related to sight word development. Okay, so David Kilpatrick's book, the first one that was up, that first slide, this is one of the things he says. How do students quickly and efficiently build a sight vocabulary? In a sense, the answer to this question represents the proverbial holy grail of reading education. That is a really important statement, okay? And so how do we develop a sight word vocabulary? Because you've got to have that. In order to have good comprehension, you need to have fluency in your reading. In order to read fluently, you need to have a large sight word vocabulary. Okay, and so we're going to talk about how does decoding and syllable type and different factors affect sight word development. Okay, this next slide, this is a review from last time. Kilpatrick, he splits reading into 3 phases, okay? All 3 phases are highly dependent on phonological awareness development, okay? And so that's typically what happens to students, okay? So if they get stuck, it's because of a phonological problem most commonly, okay? Stage 1, the letter name and letter sound knowledge, okay? For that, you have to have some early basic phonological awareness, okay? Stage 2, which is he calls the phonic decoding and basic spelling skills. For that, you need to have more advanced, not advanced yet, but better phonological skills. You've got to be able to segment and blend, okay? Typically, that's where struggling readers get stuck, is in that phase, okay? They can do some phonic decoding and they can do some basic spelling, but they can't move on from there, okay? They can't move into stage 3, which is what David Kilpatrick calls orthographic mapping. Orthographic mapping is the process by which words convert from effortful decoding over to automatic on-site recognition. Okay, and for advanced phonemic awareness, for orthographic mapping, you need to have advanced phonemic awareness skills. And for typical readers, they don't require instruction to get to that advanced phonemic awareness. When they're in stage 2, their decoding and their phonemic awareness develop reciprocally, okay? The better they get at decoding, the better their phonemic awareness gets. The better the phonemic awareness gets, the better they get at decoding. And they work together to move that student into advanced phonemic awareness. And advanced is where it happens automatically. They can hear whole spoken words, and their brain can identify the individual sounds automatically in those words. They don't need to effortfully do that. They have this level of proficiency with their phonemic awareness that operates at an automatic level, okay? That's for the 60% of readers who are going to make it, okay? Who come to school, they have all the right pieces to make the puzzle work, okay? They have phonological awareness, they have language development, they have all the genetic endowment that they need, okay? But for the 40% who maybe have a phonological processing problem or a working memory problem, or they come from a language poor family, they're going to need their phase 2 reading, their decoding phase isn't working well enough to promote advanced phonemic awareness. Okay, so they're going to require Tier 2 systematic, explicit, direct instruction in phonemic awareness in order to bring the phonemic awareness up to the level that's needed for sight word development. Okay, so that's how do some students, the 40%, get stuck? Without adequate phonemic awareness skills, most struggling students get stuck at the phonic decoding and basic spelling stage. Phonemic awareness continues to develop for typical readers until at least 4th grade, even without additional instruction. Okay, there's that part, okay? So for the typical reader, the skilled reader, they don't need that extra Tier 2 instruction in phonological awareness, okay? But for the poor readers, for the 40%, unless they receive proper Tier 2 phonemic awareness training, they will not acquire the advanced phonemic awareness skills that they need to develop sight words, okay? And without that adequate sight word library, vocabulary, their comprehension is going to suffer. So the skilled readers, I really want to emphasize there's 2 groups of kids in our school. Those kids that have all the pieces they need and those kids who don't. Okay, so the 60% got it, okay? They're typically developing readers. They acquire phonic decoding skills, whether or not they are directly taught them. This is from David Kilpatrick's book. And, right, they're going to get it, even with this curriculum or that curriculum, okay? With an appropriate amount of exposure to text, they build a large sight vocabulary and advanced phonemic awareness skills. And so I have a couple references. That's page 83 from Kilpatrick's book. Struggling readers require specialized instruction in order to build a sight vocabulary. So that's the 40% there. So orthographic mapping, I think it's important that we all We speak a common language around reading development, and there's problems with that. And so I hope everyone gets accustomed to the term orthographic mapping. Here's how Kilpatrick defines it. Mapping is the process readers use to store written words for immediate, effortless retrieval. It's the means by which readers turn unfamiliar written words into familiar, instantaneously accessible sight words. Skilled readers develop orthographic mapping skills naturally, simply by interacting with letters and words. Struggling readers require explicit instruction to develop orthographic mapping. And so that's the 40%, right? Their decoding and phonological phonemic awareness skills are rough, and therefore they don't naturally move into that advanced phonemic and orthographic mapping phase. So the advanced phonemic awareness is that critical part, okay? And there's a problem in almost all curricula. The phonemic awareness training drops out of the curriculum after first grade, okay? But for a lot of kids, they didn't get far enough in first grade with their phonemic awareness. And so there's a disconnect between the curriculum and what is actually needed in the classroom. So in order to convert words from effortfully decoded words to on-site recognition, advanced phonemic proficiency is required. The only way the struggling reader attains advanced phonemic awareness is through the Tier 2 instruction and practice, okay, through direct, explicit, systematic instruction and practice. So what's different about the 40% who struggle, okay? Number one, almost always, not always, but almost always, they have a phonological processing problem. They can't hear those sounds in the words the way the other kids can. They're going to need Tier 2 intervention to develop that phonemic awareness. Number two, the 30 million word gap, that's more about the kids who come from the poor, language poor families, okay? They come to school having heard 30 million, 32 million words less than their other peers, okay? That matters in a word for the letters in the word to map to the spoken form of the word. That spoken form has to be in your vocabulary, and if you've heard 30 million words less, then you're behind your neighbor, okay? Some kids have language processing deficits, not so much at the phoneme level, but at syntax and grammar and at the discourse level. Some kids are second language learners, they're ELL. Attention deficit problems are very common among kids in the struggling reader group. Working memory deficits are also common. The poverty and home environment, that matters in your reading acquisition. Dyslexia is probably the best estimates are about 15% of kids at the school are at least at risk for dyslexia, if not outright demonstrating the characteristics of it. And then number 9, a lot of kids have combinations of a bunch of those factors. It's not any single factor. Okay, so this slide, and I apologize for this, if the title got chopped off a little. It says Part 2, Building a Reading Brain. And so this comes from this company called Learning by Design, and I like their materials. They emphasize that our brains are wired for spoken language, for oral language, that we're not biologically set up for written language. So the slide of the brain there, this is from Sally Shaywitz. This came out in 2003. She had a great book called Overcoming Dyslexia. But if you look at her slide, you can see there's the brain, and then she's got 3 little areas on there identified, the Broca's area and these different areas. And that's a helpful model, okay? And at the time, it was very helpful, okay? But now, Learning by Design, this is their current model, okay? This is their 2017 model, and I think it's a more accurate reflection. And what they say is reading and writing and spelling is about oral language, okay? The written language is a code for the oral language, so the first step is you've got to get your oral language abilities in the right place, and then you can start mapping that together with the written language stuff. And so you can see there's a lot of they have a lot of different areas on there, and what they're showing is not only are there these different areas, but you have to, through instruction and practice, you have to wire these areas together. You have to connect all these different areas up into a new sort of a reading circuit in the brain. okay? That doesn't happen naturally. It's only by exposure to a written language or an alphabetic code. So they say that the brain is biologically, this is from Learning by Design, the brain is biologically wired only for oral language, which they put speaking and listening and understanding, but it's not wired for written language, the reading and the writing. There are no neurological or biological structures specific to reading and writing, but there are for oral language, right? That's been well demonstrated at this point. There are no genes specific to reading and writing, okay? There are genes specific to dyslexia, though I would point that out. Okay, so what they say is through proper instruction and practice, you're going to rewire your student's brain. So that you take a brain that's set up for oral language, and you can't put a new brain in, but what you can do is reconnect those different areas and rewire them so that you form these new circuits, okay? To successfully read and write and spell, the human brain must recycle regions of the brain biologically designed for other purposes. They're designed for visual processing or for auditory processing or for oral language. We must create new circuits and connections attuned to written language. That's the name of the game. And for the 60%, you know what? The regular curriculum does a great job. ReadyGen does a wonderful job of that. But for the 40%, they're going to need some Tier 2 help with that and getting those circuits wired up in their brains. So I love Hebb's rule. I can remember when I came across Hebb's rule, and it really had an effect on my thinking about reading instruction. So Hebb's rule says cells that fire together wire together. And so in that complicated model of the brain, you can see how I'll show you. It's coming up in a couple slides. They show how the different areas need the frontal portions for the executive skills, the visual processing stuff in the back of the brain, the auditory processing. All these different areas need to get wired together for fluent, skilled reading, okay? So students with phonological deficits, those are the kids who are struggling. That's most of those kids in that 40% group, okay? They might also have those other deficits, working memory or different things like that also. So students with phonological processing deficits often can't distinguish between similar vowel sounds, okay? When they hear those words or hear the individual sounds, the teacher holds up the A and says, this is ah. For some students, that it doesn't sound like it might sound like or or ah, okay? And then the next time they hear it, it sounds like something different, okay? That's the nature of a phonological processing deficit. We've got to get them where they have stable representations of those phonological information in their brain, okay? So students with phonological processing deficits, they can't distinguish between similar sounds. Similar but different sounds sound the same to those students, and so you've got to have a way of helping them to distinguish those dissimilar sounds that are similar to each other. So drawing students' attention to the place and method of articulation is a way for those students to distinguish similar sounds of language. So Speech to Print, the book from Louisa Moats, is really good about this. The phonetics chapter in there, and Dr. Fierro did a wonderful job covering that for all the K2 teachers who attended that, okay? He has up there, he has a better one than this. I came up with this one. He has this little map that shows the different vowel sounds, and his map also down the bottom has on the bottom left it would have the diphthongs, the oi and the ow, and then on the bottom right it has the R control sounds, the and or and R. And so if you look I picked this vowel map, even though it didn't have those two, the diphthongs and the R controlled vowels. I like it because it has those key words on there. And so what's good about this is if you got a kid who can't hear the sounds right, well, I need some other way. This is like a multi-sensory thing. If I can draw their attention to their mouth, there's a famous successful program from Lindemood Bell. They have where they do this, where they draw the kids' attention to what is the shape of your mouth and where is your tongue at? How are you articulating these sounds? And the kids can, that's a motor, kind of a more of a motor thing where they can sense that and they can become aware of that, and that helps them to separate those similar sounds because they're thinking about how am I articulating that sound. And so in order for phonics to make sense, the first, it all starts with the oral language. And so if your oral language is not quite right, okay, down all the way to the level of the individual sounds that make up our language, then you're going to struggle with when we try to map an alphabet onto those sounds. Okay, so this is a real helpful way, I think, that we got to make sure that these struggling kids can distinguish those sounds. Okay, so before phonics will make sense, the students, they need to have adequate phonemic awareness skills. So students must become aware of the distinguishing features of phonemes. Okay, they must also learn to segment, blend, and hold speech sounds in their memory. Okay, and then this last line, to make MOIs, and I'll explain what an MOI is. It's a mental orthographic image. Okay, which is another, that's sort of the academic name for a sight word, okay? It's a mental orthographic image. So to make MOIs, they must be able to manipulate the phonemes, okay? It's not just segmenting and blending. That's what Kilpatrick points out, is that in order to convert words over to those all-important sight words, you have to have an advanced level of phonemic awareness. And for those struggling readers, that's not going to come naturally just through their interaction with letters and sounds. They're going to need some tier 2 instruction. You're going to need to turn to your ready up, and you're probably going to have to go down quite a ways. If you're a grade 4 teacher and you've got a struggling reader, grade 4 ready up does not include phonemic awareness. You need to go backwards in the ready up curriculum until you find you get to a level A and B, I think, are the levels that have the phonemic awareness training in there. Okay, so this gets back to that problem I mentioned last time, where when we speak, for spoken language, we say words as co-articulated units. We don't say the individual sounds that make up the word. And that's great. That works, really makes speaking and listening and understanding much more efficient. But when we start to read, to decode and spell those words, all of a sudden we need to be able to deal with the individual sounds, okay? Struggling readers that's their difficulty. They can't go inside of co-articulated words and find those individual sounds. They're going to need activities that draw their attention down to the individual letters and sounds, okay? Critical that those activities occur for them. Otherwise, they're not going to develop that phonemic awareness. Okay, so phonics and phonemic awareness, I still, I'm in lots of meetings at different schools. It's pretty regular that teachers sort of interchange phonemic awareness and phonics as if they're the same thing, and they're not. They're very different, okay? They're dependent, they're reciprocal, they help each other, but they're not the same thing. So phonemic awareness, this is from Louisa Moats, the conscious awareness that words are made up of segments of our own speech that are represented with letters in an alphabetic writing system. So phonemic awareness, as David Kilpatrick says, you could do it in the dark, okay? It's an auditory thing, okay? But phonics is the study of the relationship between the letters and the sounds that they represent. So reading instruction, that's another definition of phonics, is that reading instruction that teaches sound symbol correspondences is phonics. So again, this gets back to that nomenclature thing, and that we're speaking a common language. That these two are not the same, but they're related and they are reciprocal to each other. Okay, so once basic phonemic awareness is in place, then we have to develop the phonic decoding skills and spelling skills, okay? These skills come easily to the 60%. The low 40% require systematic, so that systematic means it goes from easy up to more challenging, explicit instruction in phonics and word study and spelling. And so the goal of all that is that we develop an adequate bank of sight words, which will then lead to fluency, which then supports our comprehension. So fully specified sight words are really important. Even the low 40% of kids, they are converting words over to automatic on-site recognition, but their sight words are not fully specified. So fully specified sight words are more than just the spelling or the orthography. The fully specified sight words have all the letters in the word, okay? So that's what we know about struggling readers is their sight words don't contain all the letters, okay? They also contain the pronunciation and the meaning of the word, and all three of those are automatically fired when the word is encountered. That's the critical part, is that their sight words need to have the spelling, the pronunciation, and the meaning all wired together into an automatically firing unit. For the low 40% of kids, in order for that to happen, it's going to require more instruction in phonemic awareness and a lot more practice and instruction with their decoding. So that leads to full alphabetic decoding. What we know is that those struggling readers, when they're decoding, they're not really, their attention is not catching all the letters in the word. They're skipping some of the letters, okay? And you see that when they're trying to decode words for you, those struggling kids. So for fully specified sight words to form, a student must engage in full alphabetic decoding. So not some of the letters, all the letters in the right order. Skilled readers naturally engage in full alphabetic decoding. Struggling readers require instruction and practice for full alphabetic decoding. Okay, they need to be, their attention through instructional activities needs to be drawn specifically directly to each individual letter. Okay, so in order to be a fluent reader and a good comprehender, you need to have an adequate bank of sight words. Okay, I call this the critical mass of sight words. When struggling readers have automated most of the spelling patterns they will encounter, critical mass, reading suddenly becomes much easier. Typical readers hit this in 4th grade, struggling readers later, depending on how severe their difficulty. I was recently at the middle school and working with a student, and I interviewed that student, and they said that I asked them, do you recall when reading got easier? And they could tell me down to the semester. They said 6th grade, 2nd semester is when all of a sudden reading got easier. And I know what happened then for them. At 6th grade, 2nd semester, they hit critical mass on their sight word bank. So back to Hebb's rule, okay? Cells that fire together wire together. For the 60%, that wiring together happens naturally through their decoding and reading and their interaction with words and letters. For the 40%, it's going to require specific Tier 2 intervention, ready up. Okay, do we have different Tier 2 interventions available at the school for depending on the teacher? There's Spire, there's Sound Sensible, there's Ready Up. Okay, we have various ones. Some of our Tier 2 interventions are not as strong as the others. Okay, and so I think you need to be careful when you're choosing which one to help kids wire up their brain so that it can deal with written language. So part 3 here, I want to talk about the 6 syllable types. You lower grades teachers who in the ReadyGen curriculum, this stuff is included in there, but I believe by grade 3, certainly by grade 4 and 5, it's not in the curriculum at all. And in fact, it's not in the Ready Up at those levels either. And so I want to review this quickly. So it's critical. When I was a reading teacher, when I came out of UNM and I got my first job in 1996, I quickly realized I don't have a clue how to teach reading, and that's what started me on this journey. Okay, and ever since then I've been pursuing that. And the knowledge has continued to develop. I point out, Kilpatrick's book came out in 2015, okay? And so I'm sure in another 5 years there'll be additional information that's really critical and important, and so you need to stay current with the developments. So in order to try to, here I am in 1996, how do you teach reading? I had a friend who was a special ed teacher in Vermont, and so I called him up and I said, hey, what's the deal? And he said, well, you have to teach the kids about open and closed syllables. And I said, well, I've never even heard of open and closed syllables. And now, so ReadyGen does include this information in the scope and sequence. But for those upper grades teachers, your struggling readers, they need this too, okay? And it's not included in your curriculum. And so I want to review this. So there's these 6 primary types: closed, open, vowel team, R-controlled, vowel consonant E, and then consonant LE, and then a lot of people throw in this 7th category, which is a little bit of a grab bag, with the schwa as the primary one. Schwa is one of the most common vowel sounds. So let's move through these. So closed syllable, a closed syllable is a syllable with a short vowel spelled with a single vowel letter and ending in one or more consonants. So if you look at, I put some examples at the bottom of each of these slides. The word hat, okay? So there's the vowel, and what I like to say, it might not be technically correct, is that vowel is closed off by a consonant. It's a closed syllable. It's not open after the vowel. So hat is a word, a closed word, but then in the word letter you have two syllables, right? The first syllable, let, is a closed syllable. So these syllable types can be either whole words or they can be in multi-syllable words with combinations of syllable types. Okay, and then apple. Okay, and so we'll talk too about why do we have two P's in the word apple. It doesn't say apple, right? There's only one P sound in that word. Okay, open syllable. So this is the foundation of our orthography, in my opinion. Okay, so an open syllable is a syllable that ends with a long vowel sound spelled with a single vowel letter. So look at the first example, me. Okay, after the E there's nothing, it's open. Okay, so open vowels have a long sound. Okay, so then you see the word table. Okay, the first syllable is open, T-A, it's open. Okay, in a multi-syllable words, or the word between. Okay, the B-E, that's an open syllable. Okay, so then there's vowel teams, and this, I personally prefer separating digraphs and diphthongs, okay? But most people put them together. But I think for some of the kids it makes it a little bit confusing, and I believe in a good phonics, almost all phonics curricula, they separate these out during the instruction, okay? So syllables with a long or a short vowel, so it can be either way on this, with long or short vowel spellings that use 2 to 4 letters to spell the vowel. So you think about the vowel team, can be like a vowel digraph, EA, something like that. But then there's words, through, where you have OUGH, where you have 4 letters that are representing the vowel sound. Okay. Then there's the diphthongs, so the ow and the oi are included in this vowel team category. Okay. So there's some examples of those. I put the word great as an example, and spoil and team. Okay. So, and I think I'm going to go back here. These syllable types are the ones that are really challenging, I think, for the struggling readers. That often, this is where there's some ambiguity in the code, okay, in the alphabetic code, and this is, in my experience, very commonly where they struggle. Okay, R-controlled syllables. Okay, a syllable with the ER, IR, OR, AR, or the UR. Okay, the vowel pronunciation changes before the R. The R is controlling that vowel. So they don't make a long vowel sound, they don't make a short vowel sound, they make a new sound, okay? And I think it's important to explicitly point that out to the kids. So there's some examples, right, of different R-controlled syllables. Vowel consonant E syllable. So this is an unaccented final syllable that contains a consonant before L, okay, followed by a silent E. So when I was, learning my reading skills, I worked with a teacher who I think had maybe got this either from Slingerland or from Spalding, one of those two curricula, and she had this thing where she told me, where that final LE always takes a consonant with it. She had this little sort of mnemonic device that she would have the kids do, where they would do like this, and they would show that LE pulling a consonant over to it. And I found that real helpful with the kids. And so this one, the first one, bottle, gets to that again. It doesn't say bottle. So why do we have that extra T in there if we only have one T sound in the word? Okay, my way of explaining that is that that first syllable, if we don't have a T in that first syllable, if it was just a B-O, okay, then it would be a botal, okay? We need that extra T, that silent T, to close off that first syllable, okay? And you look at that second one where I split it both ways, right? There's a bagel, or if we did it wrong, if we split that syllable in the wrong place and the final LE didn't take a consonant with it, then that G would go over to the other side, right? And it would be a bagel, right? And so you can see there how always that LE pulls a consonant with it. And so if the first syllable needs a consonant, that's when we get into that doubling kind of stuff. Okay, so I've seen a lot, teachers tell the kids, especially the older kids, just sound it out, chunk it. Okay, but if that kid has never had explicit, direct, systematic instruction in the syllable types, they're not going to know where to split that. So they don't know those syllables, and so the syllable type matters. Okay, so until a struggling reader has mastered the syllable types, sounding out a word feels like a random act. Okay, it could be any sound. Okay, which sound does the vowel make? If you haven't been instructed, just take a guess. Okay, and what about vowel teams? Okay, now there's more than one vowel there. Okay, so syllable type matters. The same letter can represent many different sounds depending on the syllable type. So I put all these words that all have the letter A in there, but we have all different. Tablet, so there's a closed one. Table, there's open. Manage, so we have a closed and a schwa. Apartment starts with a schwa. Then there's R control. Train has a vowel team. Okay, awful has a diphthong. So all those have the letter A, but they all are different syllable types. Okay, and that's where you really need to instruct the kids. Okay, so now I want to talk about this sort of frequency-based learning, and this is really maybe I think it's really critical part. This comes from Marilyn Adams, from that third book that I had up there about beginning to read, specifically chapter 6, which I'll share with you guys. So the neural units responsible for recognizing individual letters become linked by a set of associative links. The strength and type of the associations between these neural units reflects the frequency with which the letters have been seen together. So the more frequently two letters or more letters have been seen together, your brain begins to unitize that. It builds associations between those letters. The more commonly they're seen together, the stronger they're associated. And what happens is, after they get strongly enough associated, the brain then unitizes that, right, into an automatically firing unit, a multi-letter unit. Okay, this frequency-based stuff is important. For those struggling 40% kids, remember, they're not looking at all the letters. They're not processing all the letters properly, and so that's going to mess up the frequency with which the letters are seen together. One time I saw these two letters with each other. The next time I saw two different letters. Okay, I skipped over some letters. So the frequency-based stuff matters in how what's getting wired together by Hebb's rule. Okay, is it the correct letters or not? So Marilyn Adams talks about, in chapter 6, she talks about this, she calls it inner letter activation energy. So those letters are being activated, but when you look at the page, right, the sight of the letters activates the neural units in your brain. So she gives the example with the word the, and she says, T and H at the beginning of a word, they commonly occur together at the beginning of a word. Think about all the TH words, right? The and there and then, and right, there's on and on, okay? It's very common for those two. So what she says is T and H commonly occur together, so they're strongly linked, and they send activation energy to each other. So just the sight of the T at the beginning of a word will automatically send activation energy to the letter H in your brain. Okay, those letters, the H is primed just by the sight of the T. If you've been, if you've actually been processing those letters frequently enough, okay, and accurately. Okay, so then she gives another example. Q and M, okay, they very rarely occur together. Okay, they send inhibitory energy. So instead of sending activation energy, right, when the letter Q is at the beginning of a word, I apologize if I'm wrong, but every time the letter U is the letter after that in an English word, okay? So all the other letters in the alphabet they're not being activated. In fact, they receive sort of this suppressing signal saying, don't send out activation energy, okay? So there's these two ideas. Letters commonly seen together share activation energy, and letters that are not seen together, they send an inhibitory signal, like don't turn on those other letters. They're not being primed, okay? They're being turned off. That only works if you actually process the letters, okay? Specifically, if you have activities that draw your attention to the individual letters, because remember, it's frequency based, okay? So, how are words perceived as wholes? Strong associations develop between letters commonly seen together, okay? Like we were talking about, they share activation energy. Because of the associative links between these letters, each letter speeds and reinforces the perception of the other letters. That's how a sight word fires off automatically. All the letters are sending activation energy back and forth, right, immediately on sight without having to process them. And when you've done that enough, when you have actually processed the letters consciously enough times, then they unitize, then they switch over to being automatically recognized sight words. Okay, and it's that shared activation energy. There's an activation energy threshold that has to be met. Okay, until that word enough energy builds up. If you think about kind of the tip of the tongue moment when you're trying to get a word and you can't think of it, you can feel the word in there. You're having some activation energy, but not enough activation energy for it to come fully to conscious awareness. And that's the idea here, that when the kids are properly instructed and they've processed all the letters and decoded and spelled that word enough time, the letters go together, they begin to share activation energy, and that word can switch over to automatic recognition. So this is what I call the second grade rut, or why most students with dyslexia stall out at second grade level. Second grade is when typical readers' sight word vocabularies become large enough for consolidated multi-letter units to begin to emerge. Okay, so you see what happens there? For a typical reader, their decoding and their phonemic awareness got proficient enough that all of a sudden words are beginning, the multi-letter units are beginning to wire together, Hebb's rule, okay? And then once you start doing that, then you can start developing a sight word vocabulary, but it's only when you can start processing multi-letter units automatically. So students with dyslexia are not forming multi-letter units at the same rate or of the same quality as typical readers. They remain in the partial alphabetic stage much longer. Okay, and that would be down, lower than the orthographic mapping. Okay, in level 3. Okay, so from Kilpatrick. So then I have what I call the fourth grade rut. So it's during fourth grade that skilled readers begin to perceive syllables as units. And this is really critical here, okay? At this point, skilled readers perceive syllables more quickly and accurately than they do single letters. And there's an experiment that Marilyn Adams points out in her chapter 6 that I think is worth mentioning here, okay? So she has this section which she calls seeing syllables, and I think that's a great concept. That are your students seeing syllables? That's the idea, whatever grade they're in. Okay, so skilled readers' ability to recognize a long word depends on whether they can automatically chunk it into syllables. Skilled readers, they're not thinking, oh, here's a syllable and there's a syllable boundary. Their brain automatically parses that word into the syllables, okay? And remember, depending on which side of the line that consonant went on, that's going to be an open or closed syllable. And so your brain needs to automatically do that for you, okay? But if you are a kid with a phonological impairment or dyslexia or one of these other difficulties, then you're going to need direct instruction, okay? You're going to, for your their brains are not pulling words apart into the syllable boundaries, okay? They're going to need direct, systematic, explicit instruction for that to happen. It will happen with instructional help. The ability to automatically recognize a word depends on the nearly simultaneous activation of all the letters in each syllable. Okay, there's that frequency-based shared activation energy. Okay, and that's where full alphabetic decoding comes in. If they're not engaging in full alphabetic decoding, then their activation energy is not going to be right, and it's going to mess up that sight word development. So from Marilyn Adams, she points out that the DR is an onset that's commonly seen in English. Lots of words start like that, or syllables. Okay, DN is an onset that is not commonly seen in English. So when a reader sees DR on the page, the D and the R send activation energy to each other. If you're a kid who's been engaging in full alphabetic decoding and it's going right. When the reader sees DN, the D and the N send inhibitory energy to each other. D and N almost never go together in the same syllable. Okay, they're not a consonant blend. Okay, so when D and N do occur next to each other in English, they do so at a syllable boundary. So she gives us some examples here where they're in a word, D and N are right next to each other. But for skilled readers, what happens is because their brain has built up these frequency-based common patterns, okay, and their brain automatically says, wait a minute, D and N, they don't go together, so that means there's a syllable break here, and so their brain automatically parses that word into the syllables. They're not having to consciously do that. So midnight, Sydney, baldness, redness, okay, those are examples of a D and N across a syllable boundary. And you can see on that last line where I did the syllable boundary in the wrong way, so the first word becomes my denight. Okay, and you can see how that really matters, okay? Which side of the line, the syllable boundary that consonant goes on affects the pronunciation, okay? The 60% of kids, they don't need direct instruction on this. This is going to automatically happen for them. But for the low readers, they're going to need instruction in syllabication and syllable types. Okay, so interletter activation energy, this gets back to Marilyn Adams, that's the process, the underlying process that supports seeing syllables. So D and N very rarely occur together in the same syllable. They send inhibitory energy to each other, automatically splitting the word into syllables, okay, and that automatic part, right? And so what we have to do with the kids is we have to draw their attention systematically and explicitly enough through instruction and practice to the individual letters such that their frequency-based underlying data set that supports this automatic syllable parsing begins to build up. Okay, and you build it up through that frequency-based shared interletter activation energy. They're either going to share activation energy turning another letter on or inhibitory energy turning it off, and then all that comes from the frequency with which you have properly interacted with those letters in those positions in those words. So thus, while D and N are expected to inhibit each other, they are also going to be activated by their neighbor on the other side. So that's another important part of this. Okay, so the vowel on the other side is so D and N are sending a signal to each other saying, nope, we're not in the same syllable, right? But the vowel on either side of them is sending the opposite, saying, yeah, we work together. And so when that vowel is sending activation energy instead of that inhibitory energy. So this pattern of being inhibited on one side and activated on the other side automatically pulls the syllables apart. That's the goal. We want their decoding to happen smoothly and automatically and frequently enough to build up that frequency-based information that's built up in their brain subconsciously, such that they begin to see syllables. Okay, when they do that, then they can decode, then they can sound the words out, then they can begin to switch them into automatic on-site recognition. Okay, so seeing syllables, students are not taught D and N send that inhibitory signal. It happens automatically. This rule happens automatically due to the frequency of different English spelling patterns. So the 60% of kids, they behave in a rule-like manner. Okay, nobody taught them a rule about D and N, but because their frequency is a data set that supports this developed properly, then they behave in a rule-like manner. Those low kids are going to need direct instruction to get that same development. Okay, so seeing syllables again, in English, D is followed by one of 8 letters 90% of the time. So see, there's that frequency basis, okay? So A, E, L, O, R, S, U, and Y, 90% of the time, one of those 8 letters follows a D in English. But when D is followed by the other 18 letters, it's almost always across a syllable boundary. So there's a couple examples there, right, where the D is followed by those other letters, and sure enough, there's a syllable break between them. So here's Marilyn Adams' experimental evidence, where the kids, they learned these lists. They had 2 lists of words, and they were all 7 letters. One list, the 7-letter word, was a single syllable word. Okay, you can see those examples there. And then the second list was 7 letters, but they were multi-syllable words. Okay, and so she's thinking, well, is there going to be a difference there? Okay, so the lists were of comparable difficulty. Here's the results from her experiment. So for all younger readers who haven't developed that interletter activation energy yet, right? The lists were the same. It didn't. They took the same amount of time to decode a one syllable or a two syllable word. Okay, but for above average readers starting in the fourth grade, two syllable words became much easier. They read them more quickly and more accurately, okay, than similar length one syllable words. So what she's demonstrating is that seeing syllables phenomena, okay. It was not until the fifth grade that below average readers exceeded the above average second graders. And you see there's that second grade hump, I think, is it? Okay, so in conclusion, for today, our mission is we need to rewire students' brains for written language. Okay, remember, because their brain is set up biologically for oral language. We need to train phonemic awareness skills sufficient to develop basic decoding and spelling. Okay, we need to train up to the level of advanced phonemic awareness for the struggling readers because it's not going to happen naturally. We need to guide students into full alphabetic decoding. The 60% kids, they're automatically going to go to full alphabetic decoding. But for the struggling kids, they're not. And so their instruction and activities needs to go there. And then full alphabetic decoding plus advanced phonemic awareness is how you develop sight words. And so we need to ensure that sight words are fully specified. So that's all for today. Thank you, and I'll see you guys next time for number 4. Thank you.